are to be admired, as is the quality and sheer quantity of his work. His nominator says, "For many years I have read and admired Dermot Cole's columns in the Fairbanks Daily News-Miner. His columns contain opinion, but they are so well-sourced and often hard-hitting pieces of reporting. His wording is concise and economical. His prose is clean and generally respectful, but he pulls no punches. Dermot's mastery of complex oil and gas issues, born of hours, according to his wife Debbie, of reading reports and listening to legislative hearings, make him a trusted authority on the subject. He's also reported and written about many of the social questions affecting Alaskans, from the arrival of spring's first Canada goose to the recent oil tax debate. Fairbanks, indeed Alaska, counts on Dermot as a trusted friend and neighbor." Congratulations.
First of all, I want to thank the Press Club for this award. It's really an honor, and yeah, nearly 40 years. It's hard for me to believe that I've been doing this for nearly 40 years. This award is named after Tom Snap and Howard Rock, and several people in here have been around long enough to remember Tom or Howard, but many of you haven't. So I just want to tell you a quick story about Tom. I didn't know Howard, but I knew Tom quite well because he showed up at every event in Fairbanks for many years. He was the publisher of the All Alaska Weekly, and he got into journalism not to make money. He was basically scraping by, and he kind of never knew, if he'd have enough money to put out the next edition. But just to give you, he was a man from Virginia, and he couldn't stand still. And this is what talking to him was like. Tom would always do this as if he was on a ship, and he spoke in a slow Virginia drawl. He always appeared to know less about what he was asking you about than you thought he knew. Sometimes he did know less about it than you thought he knew. I remember one time, about 30 years ago, at this very event, Alaska Press Club a conference, there was a guest, there was a group of newsmakers who were gathered to talk about how they had been treated by the press. It included George Sullivan, who was mayor, I think, either he was mayor then or just had been mayor, the father of the current Anchorage mayor. Bob Yucatel, who was an Anchorage businessman, and others. Now, Bob was a very aggressive guy who kind of became famous recently because of his daughter linked to Tiger Woods. But anyway, talk about Bob. Bob promoted something called Alaska 1984, which was his grand vision of holding a World's Fair in Anchorage, which was going to bring $500 million, really, $500 million to Anchorage. And he got the municipality to give him money, he got the state of Alaska to give him money, and it was going great guns until they pulled the plug, and it never happened. So we had a press club event, and he's talking about the news coverage. And he said dejectedly, "It looks like you can't have dreams anymore." That's what he said. He was really upset and he was mad. And Tom snapped right up and said, "Well, one man's dream is another man's nightmare." And that's how he talked. Anyway, Tom was a great guy, and he was a good inspiration to all of us in that he worked really hard. However, he did work himself into an early grave, so I don't really want to say that. But he was a very inspiring journalist who showed up all the time, and though he never could quit smoking cools, he succeeded. One other fact about it, he could not type on an electric typewriter. He was a pre-computer guy, Tom, because his fingers were too fast. He had to use a manual typewriter because he pounded it. And he used to work 24, 30 hours straight before his edition came out because he didn't get it done. It was a weekly paper. Finally, in the last years when he was sick, he would lie down on his cot and dictate his stories to his sister, who was helping put out the paper. Anyway, I could go on. I don't want to. Thank you very much for this award.
Thank you very much. So we're going to take a quick break, about 5 minutes. The food is served.